In recent weeks, we've been talking about growth in the Indo-Pacific, by which we mean Southeast Asia and India. And what we've been talking about is how growth in the Indo-Pacific and in the Indosphere will replace growth in China in order to generate the demand for the kind of things that Australia sells. And today what we want to look at is we want to examine a few pages from the very recently released report by the International Energy Agency on world energy outlook. In the first of these slides, what we see is how they think the demand for oil will rise between now and 2030. And what you can see is a rapidly rising chart, which takes oil demand to just under 104 million barrels a day by the time we get to 2030. Now, I've looked at those numbers myself, and currently oil demand has been growing by around about 1 million barrels a day. And recently, and only very recently, that growth rate has slowed down to 0.8 million barrels a day. And even at 0.8 million barrels a day, oil demand by 2030 would get to 105 million barrels a day. So we think that their estimates for oil may be just a touch on the conservative side. But still, it shows steady increase in world demand for oil. In the period that we've been through from 2015 to 2023, we can see where most of the demand for oil has come from. And the biggest single increase in demand has been for 5 million barrels a day from China. That 5 million barrels a day growth from China has been followed by growth in India as the next largest demand area of a little over 1 million barrels a day. And then we get into the other areas which we're talking about in the Indo-Pacific, where Southeast Asia oil increases has been at a rate of about 0.3 million barrels a day, and Africa the same as that. Interestingly, growth in demand in Europe has actually been negative by about 0.8 million barrels a day. There's been steady demand in North America, and Japanese and Korean demand has been to decline by 0.8 million barrels a day. But if we look forward, we see the areas of demand are entirely different than they have been in recent years. No more is there rapid growth in oil demand in China. And the International Energy Agency puts this down to the electrification of motor vehicles in China, with the energy being generated firstly by a dramatic expansion of nuclear power generation, but also by an expansion of electricity by renewables. Even though there's no increase in demand for oil in China, there's a very rapidly increasing demand for oil in India, where demand is growing by 2 million barrels a day. As well as that, other parts of the Indo-Pacific are growing more rapidly as well. Southeast Asia is growing by about 1.3 million barrels a day, and Africa is growing by about 1.3 million barrels a day. Interestingly, the International Energy Agency sees significant falls in demand in Europe and in North America. It's not just in oil demand that we see significant changes. International Energy Agency talks about changes in demand in LNG in terms of billions of cubic meters. So these are the units that you're seeing. So the European Union in the period up until 2023, from 2015 to 2023, demand grew by over 100 billion cubic meters. China was the next, where demand grew by 74 billion cubic meters. And then, of course, there was India with smaller growth, and Southeast Asia, which was flat, and Japan was falling. Again, this changes dramatically with a swing towards demand growth from the Indo-Pacific. And indeed, these changes in demand for LNG, and LNG demand is driven by electricity demand. And we previously talked about how there's, because of growing manufacturing in the Indo-Pacific countries, in countries like Vietnam and the Philippines and Indonesia, that generates an increase in demand for LNG. And so what we see is that there is, in the period 23 to 25, the International Energy Agency thinks that there will be a decline by about 20 billion cubic meters, but still dramatic rises in China by just under 50 billion cubic meters. And that's when we see the other areas in the Indo-Pacific take off, with India itself having growth of about 54 billion cubic meters, and Southeast Asia, where we're seeing a lot of growth in manufacturing, with growth of over 104 billion cubic meters. And Japan is an area that falls. When the International Energy Agency looks at where this natural gas is coming from, what we see is there's a dramatic increase in LNG production worldwide. From the level of 600 billion cubic meters in 2024, total production rises by 2030 to about 840 billion cubic meters. So dramatic increase in the world trade for LNG. Australia is, of course, a major exporter of LNG, and where the demand for that LNG is coming from is the enormous growth in manufacturing in the Indo-Pacific, and growth in demand in not just India, but dramatic increases in demand for LNG in countries like Vietnam and in the Philippines and Indonesia.